Davetiniz için teşekkürler. I hope it's correct. Thank you
Okay.
very much for the invitation.
Hocam YouTube'da başladık.
Mr. Nitu also online.
Mr. Christian Nitero also now together with us. Mr. Christian, you welcome.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me.
Hi. Firstly, I introduce myself. I am Professor Kutay Karaca. I am not only member of the Department of Political Science and International Relations, but also I am the head of the Graduate Studies Institute at İstanbul Aydın University. My research area is especially on Asia, Russia, but mainly China and Chinese strategy. And also I am a retired colonel from Turkish Air Force. Because of that, the security is international security is so important for me. You know that. I again thank all of you to be a part of our organization. Firstly, Murat, the floor is yours. Firstly, then second me. Okay.
Thank you, Kutay Hocam. By the way, I want to thank to all participants and audiences about this webinar. So I'm very happy about the arranging this webinar, by the way. First of all, special thanks to the İstanbul Aydın University and the president of the Aydın University, Associated Professor Dr. Mustafa Aydın, and Association for the Association of the Diplomatic Relations. And also I want to thank to the Kutay Hoca. So we are also talking about very hot issues. So as far as we know that 2 months ago, the Black Sea in the re-escalating the issues, hot issues about this. And as far as we know that after the end of the Cold War, the Soviet republics gained their independence and the former influence sphere and hegemonic spheres of the Soviet Union became the power struggle area, geopolitical space of the other states, so that the Black Sea and the Azov Sea region also became the important regions in the post-Soviet period. And as far as we know that we can face the new actors, and according to Russian side, they are so dangerous, like NATO and the European Union. So we can also see the colorful revolutions experience. So this colorful revolutions reflected to Russia, and the results of this colorful revolutions resulted as the power, the heavy important powers from the Russia, like the 5-day war between Russia and Georgia. And as far as we know that in 2014, the annexation of the Crimea and the escalation, the crisis in the Donbas region. So we will also talk about this, about the security issue in the Black Sea region and the Azov Sea region. First of all, I want to introduce the guest of our webinar focused on the Black Sea region and the Azov Sea region. First of all, from Marmara University, the Professor Dr. Giray Saynur Derman, and the Associated Professor Dr. Aygerim Yelibova and Associated Professor Dr. Saken Mukhan from the Narhoz University in Kazakhstan, and the Assistant Professor Dr. Christian Nitu from Lambu University, and Assistant Professor Dr. Yulia Bleska from Karabukh University, and I saw that the Mr. Neriman Ustayev from Kiev, the director of the Gasprinsky Institute on the Geostrategy, and the latest one, the Mr. Maxim Vdovchenko. So he was the Consul of General of Ukraine in Istanbul. Of course, today's case is about the geopolitical aspects, and of course, the geopolitical will be the center of our webinar. However, the identity dimension of international relations, in my opinion, should not be neglected and ignored. In this context, it's important how Russians and Ukrainian people perceive each other. so that the identity dimension is very important as well. In this respect, I want to give firstly floor to Dr. Yulia Bletska about this dimension, the identity dimension of this situation. So, Dr. Bletska, how do the Ukrainian and the Russian peoples view each other? So, do you think this point of view of two sides coincides the government policies, and how can we consider the problem from the identity perspective?
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me in this great seminar. And second, thank you for these questions, because if we want to analyze and understand foreign policy of a state, we have to understand the basis of its nation building process. And if we are talking about especially bilateral relations and conflicts in these bilateral relations, that the roots and the basis of these conflicts lays in the sphere of national identities and the perception of its own role of the state in certain region. In other words, the way you see your neighbor and the way you approach it is very much connected to the narratives that this state use for its own nation building. So the first part probably of my answer will be about the mutual perception. And at the first sight, it seems that Russian-Ukrainian relation has two periods, like before 2014 and after 2014. So before it was like good one, and after it was a problematic and a conflict one. It's not completely true. And since the time of Russian Empire, there are many ups and downs, and especially from the Ukrainian side, there were never a single perception, but instead we can talk about many camps of understanding and approaching to Russia. Due to the lack of time, of course, I will not stop here. And I would say, yes, 2014 was definitely a turning point for bilateral relations. It was for mutual perception, and what is most important for perception between the relations between interpersonal relations and relation between societies. And this last point is something that Russia didn't take into account. And at the end, it caused that Russian foreign policy failed in Ukraine. I will explain what I mean, but first, let us see what was this goal of Russian foreign policy in this area, and what kind of discourses and especially narratives were produced by each side about their counterpart. So the key for understanding Russian discourse is, of course, imperialist way of thinking and expansionist policies. Main concept of these are Ruski Mir. So it's Russian world, let's say, and it's all of the territories where people understand, not even speak, but just understand Russian language. So considered by Russian as a sphere of their interest. The second concept is a brothers nation, so мы же братья. And the third one, probably very similar to the second one, is один народ, what is one nation. But actually, it was just a cover for politics of dominance. It means that Russia never truly accepts the existing of Ukrainian nations and their right to have a sovereign state. From the Ukrainian side, it wasn't much exception or rejection of this Russian attitude. I would say that up to 2014, it was kind of okay if you say so. So it was more or less neutral position from the Ukrainian side to this Russian attitude towards Ukraine. But the situation cardinally changed in 2014. Russian occupation and illegal annexation of Crimea, and then the real war in eastern Ukraine, a creation of Russian puppets entities such as DNR, so-called, and LNR, of course, it changed everything. It changed state politics in Ukraine, it changed foreign political policy goals, it changed society and perception of Russia. As soon as Ukrainians saw that their so-called brothers could kill them, the narrative used by Russia and the Russian Federation in Ukraine actually lost its effect. And the war in Donbass was a huge trigger for strengthening of national identity. It actually reminds people that they are actually Ukrainians. Yeah, so I mean, the national identity became the primary type of identity, and it doesn't allow to people, as it was before, to be in between. So you have to choose who you are, yeah? Russian, Ukrainian, or other. A most crucial part here that people start to make this choice not on the base of Soviet type of identity, so-called this nationalnost, but on the civic base. Yeah, so we can talk about the emergence of civic Ukrainian identity, and the war erased this ethnic, linguistic, religious difference in Ukraine, as they started to consider themselves as Ukrainians on the citizenship base. Both ethnically Russians, Crimean Tatars, ethnically Ukrainians, people who speak Ukrainian, Russian, or etc., Muslim, Christian, they were fighting together in the eastern part of Ukraine against Russian aggression. So society changed, as I already told, and we saw that language is not an issue anymore. I mean, Russian language or Ukrainian language is not an issue anymore. So these two camps that Russia usually saw as a Russian-speaking Ukraine and Ukrainian-speaking Ukraine, it's not a real case. We can talk about bilingual societies in reality. And from now, I mean, from 2014 at least, we definitely see that Ukrainians do not consider language as their element of national, primary element of national identity. And vice versa for Russia, this Russian language is a very crucial concept, as the primary goal for invasion of Ukraine was the danger of Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. But I mean, at the end, we saw that it wasn't the real reason. And after the war, many people switched to Ukrainian, and doesn't matter to which ethnic identity they have, Russian or Ukrainian. And this is also very important to understand the interstate relations between the societies. And from the perspective of politics, and especially foreign politics, Russian aggression made Ukraine to turn to the West as the only alternative, as this Russian-Ukrainian conflict is perceived in Ukraine as a conflict of civilization. And also, it is perceived as a window to escape from Russian influence and became a part of so-called civilized world. It changed the perception of Russia in very crucial way. So before 2014, it was like 60–70% according to opinion polls who has good attitudes toward Russian and Russia as a state and Russians as a society. But now in Ukraine, according to the different opinion polls since 2014, see Russia as the main threat, as the main enemy. And according to the result of the research, the first three concepts that actually associated with Russia is aggression, dictatorship, and cruelty. So again, it's about the Ukrainian society. And very strange also moment that it was the research that showed that attitudes towards Russian in Ukraine and I mean, attitude of Ukraine toward Russia is much better than attitude of Russians towards Ukrainians. And on the first side, it seems strange. I mean, because at the end, it was Ukraine who lost its territory and has lost many soldiers and population. But actually, reason is very simple. The source of information that these societies consume. Yeah. So if we look at the Ukrainian society, they doesn't have this media monopoly as it is in Russia. That's why at the end, I mean, Ukrainian society consume both Ukrainian sources of information and Russian. So that's why at the end we have a better perception of Russians in Ukraine. Russians, I mean, the Russia as a state, or the Russian as a society, not the ethnic minority, than Ukrainians in Russia. So, like, also we all know about the huge mechanism of propaganda that Russia uses, and in this propaganda, generally Ukrainians shows as a fascist, as a cruel, I don't know, soldiers or anything. Anything that doesn't have actually common in reality. That's why we have this disbalance of understanding between two societies. And here's extremely important issue that I want to finish actually my talk is about the perception of Ukrainian society. In Western academia, up to 2014, and in Russia, probably in Russian academic research up until now, Ukraine is shown as two different discourses, so-called Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. And even in like a few months ago, I saw recent Turkish research that uses this type of discourse, saying about two different parts of Ukraine. And usually they are presented as opposite and often conflicting discourses. And first of all, I would like to stress that this is totally outdated. We made a research in 2019, and in last year, our research as a book was launched here in Turkey. And according to this field research, we understood that it's definitely this dichotomy of Western Eastern Ukraine. It doesn't explain the current processes that is in Ukraine. And the best proof of that, that being misled by this outdated concept and the fact that Russia unable to understand the processes that happens in Ukraine made Russia fail in their foreign policy. And what is most important, it questions the success of Russian expansionist policy. It failed not only in so-called Eastern Ukraine, but it failed in cities that usually considered to be like pro-Russian or at least Russian-speaking, something like Kharkiv or Odessa. So if we take the main targets of Russian expansionist politics, which was so-called Novorossiya, and the build of, again, so-called Ruski Mir, which was one of the tools to enhance Russian dominance in the Black Sea, our today topic. So we see that Ukraine as a state, as well as Ukrainian society, if we see like recent opinion polls, actually reject these projects. They reject to be part of this Ruski Mir civilization. And Ukraine became a so-called stumbling block for Russian expansionist idea. And without Ukraine, these projects are failed, actually. All these projects are failed. So what kind of results we have? Ukraine lost some territories and it has an ongoing war. And it is a serious challenge for the state and nation building process. But Russia lost much more. It totally lost Ukraine. The very idea of Ruski Mir and Russian greatness is a big soap bubble without Ukraine itself. And that is why Ukraine has much more importance for Russia than Russia for Ukraine. Ukraine has both symbolic and geostrategic meaning for Russia. And Ukraine has the alternative national building without Russia. But beside the idea of Ruski Mir, where the center place is given again to Ukraine, Russia doesn't have any alternative national project. So losing Ukraine makes Ruski Mir so meaningful idea. I hope that I didn't take too much time, and I explained the main ideas of why we have this conflict of interest and how this conflict actually affects societies.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Bletska. So we are also illuminated by the identity aspect of this problem. So in my opinion, it's very important for this. So we can also talk about the geopolitical aspect of this problem. So this crisis, by the way. So what are the basic cornerstones of the Ukraine's Black Sea and the Azov Sea region policy? And of course, we are wondering about the basic cornerstones of the Russia's Black Sea and Azov Sea region policy. So in this context, I want to ask the participants, what are your predictions about the strategies and policies of Ukraine and Russia's foreign policy in the Black Sea region and the Azov Sea region as well? So I want to give floor, if available, of course, Mr. Budovchenko and Nariman Ustayev, or if you have any opinions about this, so you will talk about this.
Thank you, Dr. Jane. I will try to express my brief personal opinion. It doesn't reflect the official position. It's my point of view, and very briefly, a couple of minutes. Okay, Russian aggressive foreign policy, primarily the occupation of two regions of Georgia in 2008 and the illegal annexation in 2014 and further militarization of Crimea, have dramatically deteriorated the Black Sea and Azov Sea region security environment. For the past 7 years, Ukraine has been experiencing the first-hand and full spectrum of overt and covert aggression from our neighbor. And it is obvious that regional powers are unable to cope with Russia alone for two major reasons. I mean, in the Black Sea and Azov region. Firstly, it is a disparity in all measurable capabilities and resources. And secondly, Russia uses all its possible military and non-conventional means to gain dominance in the region and project its power beyond. If we're talking about the Black Sea region and Azov region, we must take into account that Russia looks at this region and not just only this region and beyond. Now we are witnessing the Kremlin's attempts to implement a grand bargain with the United States that would allow for the setting of new rules or, in fact, new divisions of the world. In this context, we must pay attention to Russian President Putin's recent statement at the 43rd, let me to be correct, 43rd meeting of the Pobeda, so-called Victory Russian Organizing Committee on May 20 this year. According to official Kremlin website, Kremlin.ru, the Russian president stated that Soviet Union is a historical Russia from a geopolitical point of view. This statement echoes, we all remember, with the statement at the Munich Security Conference in 2007 on the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Mr. Putin mentioned the Soviet Union collapse of Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And now we hear the same message, and it is a more than clear message for Ukraine, excuse me, that Ukraine Georgia, Azerbaijan, Moldova, the Baltic states, as well as Kazakhstan and other Central Asia countries are still considered by Moscow as a part of historical Russia. Okay. So, moreover, President Putin's statement is an equivocal challenge not just to former Soviet Republic, but for the West as well. First of all, to the United States, to the European Union, NATO, and first of all, for the countries of Black Sea region. For evaluation of security threats for Black Sea and Azov region, we must recognize that Russia is already waging undeclared war against the West. And Russia exploits weaknesses within allies as part of its strategy to undermine European and transatlantic unity. The only way Russia may hope for regaining the great power status is by weakening values-based alliances and expanding its sphere of influence. The Kremlin foreign policy and its adherence to the controlled escalation strategy may lead to a conflict with unpredictable consequences. Therefore, from my point of view, there is an urgency to act because the threats in the Black Sea and Azov region are real ones and might be realized in a hybrid or conventional manner at any time. The consequences of Russia's actions might have a devastating effect on regional security, economy, and political stability for all Black Sea countries. That is why it is crucial to boost regional collaboration, primarily NATO member states with Ukraine and Georgia, and those who, as the United States and the United Kingdom, define the region as a special interest. It is essentially about defining and exploring common values and interests. So I'm convinced that only European Atlantic unity is the mean and key for stability and peace in the Black Sea and Azov region. Otherwise, if the current threats and challenges will not be addressed in a joint and comprehensive manner, the Kremlin's influence in the region will continue to increase, and Russia will remain an existential threat to the all countries of Black Sea region and beyond for years to come. And summarizing my remark, I would like to cite the words of the President of Turkish Republic, Sayın Recep Tayyip Erdogan, expressed at the recent joint press conference with the Ukrainian President in April this year, that our main goal is that Black Sea continues to be a sea of peace, tranquility, and cooperation. We do not want an escalation of tension in our common geography in any way. So this is my point and point of view on security situation in the region. So thank you, Dr. Moore.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your opinions about regional stability in the Black Sea and the Azov Sea region. So I'm just wondering about our distinguished participants, Professor Dr. Giray Saynur Derman. So what do you think about the Russia's and Ukraine's Black Sea and Azov Sea region policy? And of course, I want to ask to Associated Professor Aygerin Yelibeova and Sakyan Mukan, and dear Dr. Christian Nitu. Yes, first of all, Professor Saynur Derman. By the way, Saynur Hocam, your microphone is closed now. Okay, now it's open.
Okay. I have a book, the name of The Black Sea. It published in Cambridge Scholars Publishing, the new dimensions of Black Sea, security, history, and economy. I have a book about the Black Sea. So I know the region, the Russian in my opinion, the Black Sea region has become one of the top priorities of the Ukrainian foreign policy in recent years, and for both Ukraine and Russian. To analyze Ukraine foreign policy, it's important to focus on relation with countries Azerbaijan, Armenia, Bulgaria, Georgia, Moldova, Romania, and Turkey also, as well as some regional initiative and projects in the region in Black Sea. While the Russian factor is of an extreme importance for the Black Sea developments, it is, however, not the main driving force behind the development of the Ukraine Black Sea policy, considering the current state of the Russian-Ukraine relations. Despite the Black Sea littoral status of the Russian Federation, this dimension is separated into a distinct track that should be considered beyond the Black Sea region. From Ukraine foreign policy point of the view, the Black Sea and Azov Sea bays are impartable. Especially about the Black Sea, Caspian region with the current trends, this approach makes sense only for an analysis of some topics, transport of energy, Eastern European and the Black Sea direction of the policy as its economic and security significance as an additional entry point to the Black Sea will be rising. For most of time, Ukraine's Black Sea politics have been predominantly concentrated on bilateral relations with a limited strategic vision of the regional processes. However, now is the time to formulate a coherent vision and additional multilateral regional initiative which would not be limited on BISEC or Guam formats. Ukraine vision of Black Sea policy has been evolving for the past 12 years from the idea to become a regional leader to a narrow, first of all, economic cooperation with the individual states' security issues, except for so-called frozen conflict management, and cooperation within the nation initiative Black Sea 4 and Black Sea Harmony has been mostly ignored. The development of the gray zones which are not controlled. The gray zones which are not controlled by the legitimate government is growing. These gray zones pose risk and challenge of the both military and non-military characters for the states. Where they exist and touch the interests and regional countries. In the past few years, Ukraine policy towards the Black Sea region has predominantly concentrated on the Crimean issue, on overcoming and preventing consequences in the peninsula's illegal annexation. This limits the development potential of Ukraine Black Sea policy, as well as the elaboration of a strategic vision of its own role in the region, the return to the status of its sea power, and the use of the full potential of the bilateral relations. Azerbaijan and Armenia, relations of Ukraine, the Caucasus republics of the last case has a sporadic and weak character. Among the factors that influence this situation, one can name the aggravation of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So the improvement of the relations with one side could be as wise by the other party to the conflict as another reason is the absence of European and Euro-Atlantic integration among the priorities for these states. So it's limit cooperation for the states, so it's limits cooperation within the Eastern Partnership and security interactions. The third factor is the named of the Armenians close alliance with the Russian Federation. Since regaining its independence in the aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse nearly 30 years ago, Ukraine has sought to build links with the West. This includes ties with institutions such as NATO, with which Ukraine has established a distinctive partnership. Kyiv has been keen on deepening those ties. Its interest in becoming of a NATO member has continued to grow since 2014. as it views NATO as a means to project Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity from its aggressive neighbor, Russia. Although NATO-Ukraine cooperation has intensified and the alliance maintains its open door policy, NATO members appear reluctant to put Ukraine on a membership track, despite the fact that Russia continues a low-intensity conflict against Ukraine and occupies Ukraine territory. Kyiv can expand its practical cooperation with NATO. However, in the near term, Kyiv will have to keep its expectation about membership modest. Upon regaining independence in 1991, Ukraine began the process of establishing regular relations with Western countries and institutions, is in part to gain greater freedom of maneuver vis-a-vis Russia. At the same time, NATO formally began to engage former member of the now defunct Warsaw Pact and post-Soviet states. In 1991, Ukraine became a member of the North Atlantic Cooperation Council, established to foster cooperation between NATO and the former Warsaw Pact and Soviet states. In 1994, Ukraine became the fourth country to join the Partnership for Peace, with NATO established to develop individual relations between the alliance and interested countries aimed at enhancing peace and security in Europe. 1994, 1995, in 1995, NATO considers the enlargement issue. Former Warsaw Pact states sought memberships, institutions such as NATO and the EU seemed a way to underpin and reinforce the democratic and economic reforms they had undertaken. As the United States and NATO contemplated the possibility of enlargement, Ukraine officials became concerned about their country's place in the future European security architecture. Ukraine didn't want to find itself in no man's land between a NATO expanding toward Ukraine's western border and Russia clearly unhappy at this prospect. The alliance, which had begun thinking about moving in parallel and enlargement on building a cooperative relationship with Russia, began considering a third track, a relationship with Ukraine. As a result, Ukraine President and NATO Secretary signed the Charter on a Distinctive Partnership. The charter laid on the principles of the partnership, defined issue for consultation and cooperation, and established a NATO-Ukraine Commission as the body to oversee the relationship. Following the Orange Revolution, Ukraine in 2005 became the first partner from the former Soviet Union to launch an intensified dialogue with NATO. The first step in an aspiring members' pursuit of membership, President Yushchenko wanted more, seeking a membership action plan in 2006. So Russia stayed silent on the question, but Prime Minister Yanukovych opposed the idea. The issue arose again in 2008 when Yushchenko presented NATO with a request for the time endorsed a different prime minister. However, Moscow came out hard against the idea. Putin threatened to target nuclear arms missiles at Ukraine, even though it was only the next stage in the process of qualifying for membership and would not have provided any guarantee that Ukraine would ultimately be invited to join the alliance. The strong Russian opposition had an impact on key allies, including Germany and France, who opposed the United States NATO's April summit in Bucharest. The summit declaration nevertheless welcomed Ukraine's aspiration to join the alliance and states. We agree today that these countries will become members of NATO, a more categorical formulation that caused no small degree of confusion. The issue become moot when Yanukovych won the presidency in early 2010. He made clear that he had no interest in the membership and secured a passage of legislation Ukraine parliament declaring the non-block status of Ukraine. However, the Maidan revolution revolution changed all that. Following the police attacks and the Maidan demonstrator that killed about 100, Yanukovych fled Kyiv on 2014. The next day, they indicated that their top foreign policy priority was to sign an association agreement with the EU. Shortly thereafter, Russian military forces seized Crimea and Russian proxy forces initiated the conflict in Donbass, a conflict which has continued for more than 7 years and claimed some 13 lives. In December 2014, NATO-Ukraine cooperation with the goal of eventual membership. In February 2019 constitutional amendment that say put membership in NATO as a strategic goal for Ukraine. NATO-Ukraine cooperation has become regularized. Ukraine as the allies use annual national program to lay out of cooperation and reforms that Ukraine will implement to align with NATO standards. The same mechanism that Ukraine will use if it were granted in MAF, working groups on issues such as defense reform and civil emerging planning operate under the NATO-Ukraine conclusion. There are so many political in this region. Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 was about maximizing power. Moscow aims to turn the Black Sea into a Russian lake to advance in national interest far and wide. For its part, NATO has been slow to respond to this challenge since its annexation of Crimea. Russia has spent the past few years militarizing the peninsula. Tens of thousands of Russian troops now call the Crimean Peninsula as dozens of ships, planes, batteries of anti-aircraft and anti-shipping missiles. This is a repeat of what Russia didn't in occupied Abkhazia after its invasion of Georgia in 2008, but on a much larger scale. The Black Sea and specifically Crimea served as a springboard for Russia to project military power in places like Georgia, Ukraine, and even places as far away as Syria and Libya. For example, Russia has used its Black Sea presence on occupied Crimea to launch and support naval operations in support of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In the early years of Moscow's intervention in Syria, the Moscow and Russian Navy guided missile cruisers played a vital role in providing air defense of Russian forces. Hundreds of thousands of tons of grain and wheat have been shipped from the Crimea to Syria to add the Assad regime's food shortage and problems. Hundreds of trips have been made between Crimea's port city and of Sevastopol and the Russian naval bases in Tartus, Syria, to transport military hardware and resupplied. But one aspect the Russia's control of Crimea is less discussed in Western policy circles. The importance of Sea of Azov to Russian Black Sea ambitions, Russian control of Crimea doesn't not only bring the goal of turning the Black Sea into a Russian lake, closer control over Crimea, give Russian dominance over the Sea of Azov. The Sea of Azov is a small body of water surrounded by Russia and Ukraine, connected to the Black Sea by the Kerch Strait. It is a shallow body of water and has proven to be strategically important for centuries. Today, the Sea of Azov is important for the geopolitical reasons. First, the Sea of Azov is vital for Ukraine's economic and military well-being. Along the coastline lies Mariupol, Ukraine's 10th largest city and one of the country's leading trade ports. Mariupol is also near the front lines of the fighting in the Donbass. Like this. Second, the Sea of Azov is important for Russia, continued occupation of Crimea for logistical reasons. With Ukraine still controlling access to Isthmus of Perekop, the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait play a role in connecting mainland Russia with Crimea and allows the resupply of Russian troops based Today, situation is same. Russia finished the construction of the controversial Crimea bridge, which spans the window of Kerch Strait and links the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula to the Russian mandate. Russia has used the Volga-Don Canal move warships between the Caspian Sea and the Sea of Azov. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Giray Saynur Derman.
I summarized all things, I think. It's very long.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very fruitful and very open issue. And as far as we know that the Russia-Ukraine relations has dimension about the civilizational aspect. So the Ukraine also was forced to choose the Eurasian side and the European side, or the Eastern side or Western side as a civilizational. So the alternative cost of choosing the European Union is about the annexation of Crimea and the protracted conflicts in the Donbass region. So I want to split my question in two sides. So I want to talk about the Eurasian aspect of the Russia-Ukraine relations to Dr. Saken Mukan and Aygelin Yelibayeva. And then I want to ask the European Union dimension of the Russia and Ukraine relations to Mr. Ustayev and dear Dr. Christian Nitu. First of all, we should talk about the Eurasian aspect. So how did Russia-Ukraine relations escalating reflect to the Central Asia and Eurasian land?
Well, okay, Murat, let me start, and then Dr. Mukan will continue on my words. Actually, frankly speaking, I didn't prepare any speech and report like we see from our previous colleagues, Professor Derman and Dr. Bilecka. So I consider, I just made a few notes because I heard that our previous speakers just talked. As a specialist of international relations, let's not just offend Russia for making and conducting their policy as they want to do it. It's just the instruments Russian politics is made. Well, let's take Ukraine and Russia from their independence. Both countries are Slavic countries historically. Russia is still the largest trade partner of Ukraine. And moreover, it was from the beginning, actually, like from 1994, it was dependent on Russian energy resources. It was the primary, actually, point why Russia was so aggressive sometimes and active on Ukrainian politics. But we shouldn't forget, and Kazakhstan actually is conducting and holds things that both countries will take a balanced approach, and both countries should find some similar things, make joint concessions to each other and settle this conflict. Because Ukraine, in the case of the big conflict in the Black Sea and Azov region, and we already heard today, actually, that Russia has finished its Nord Stream 2 pipeline construction, which was bypassing the Ukrainian energy transfer. We see that Russia is quite active, not just aggressive, but it's quite active in making their policy more alive, you know. Ukraine could be in isolation if they continue to be aggressive, and we see the last messages from Minsk that President Zelensky was just, claiming that we should forget about the Minsk treaties of 1994. We shouldn't care about this, and we can construct our own Minsk, he says. Actually, Zelensky is not initially a politician, even though he is now. And we should not forget that the politicians, a lot is done by politicians and the leaders in Ukraine, which are pro-Russian or pro-Western. And how it is connected, I partly agree with Yulia Beletska, but partly disagree, even though I didn't make any field of research. If you look at the map and if you look at any research that is done by Western experts and by our post-Soviet experts, we see the primary source why Ukraine is a bit weak in its position claiming is of blurred foreign policy. Yeah, blurred and something unclear, because the leaders of Ukraine, they change their position constantly. Yanukovych is one position, pro-Russian, and we see Yushchenko is pro-Western, and this affects the internal situation. The map of Ukraine, especially if we look at the division of according to the language, because Ukraine as Kazakhstan is very multilateral nation. We should not forget about this. And this division is made like Western part is more pro-Western and they have more nationalistic ideas. Why? The question is why? Because historically the Western Ukraine was part of Lithuania. Initially it was Poland, then it was Lithuania, and then comes the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it became so like the eastern part was later part of the Soviet Union, and the majority of Russian people, Russian-speaking Ukrainians, they live in the eastern part, southeastern part in Crimea, Crimean Peninsula. So it's not like all they want the same. They all want different. This is the problem. This is the problem because of the internal understanding and perception of national identity of Ukrainian people. So Western part, they want to be part of Western society, and that's why they claim democratization of things, and they want to be with the European Union, and they get the European Union support, while the Eastern part is more pro-Russian. And it's ethnic problems bring those problems. And I'm sure that even president is has, some kind of a hesitating position sometimes. They cannot manage their country with different views successfully. Initially, as you remember, they were Ukrainian experts saying from 1991 that Kuchma's economy was called the managed democracy, which was actually the same in Russia. Putin's policy was also as managed democracy. And today, many people claim Russia for the aggressive policy, but we should not forget one thing. Do you remember in 2005, when the United States invaded Iraq? What said Americans about that? They said very easily, they said, this is the cornerstone of our national security policy. If we find and we consider this as a threat, the Iraq's policy, then we invade despite of the agreements with NATO and other European colleagues, partners. The same with Russia. Russian people in their constitution, in their foreign policy and national security concept, the Russian people and Russian language is a primary cornerstone of their policy. Even in Kazakhstan, when Putin comes and other previous presidents visited Kazakhstan, they systematically, constantly meet with Russian society and ask, how are you? Is it okay in Kazakhstan? What is going on here with your life and so on? So it's not just like something is Putin is making or Medvedev made before. It's something that is, the cornerstone of their policy. So we have to understand from this side. Ukraine now, dependent on Russia still, is trying to manipulate and sometimes attract the foreign, the external partners. We see it we saw this from Poroshenko's policy, we saw from Yushchenko's policy, and we now see from Zelensky's policy that they're attracting too much attention to them. But he has to find some kind of what is called the decision. The decision making in Ukraine should change. Let's look at Turkey and Russia. I'm really sure that Turkey and Russia are very good partners, and Turkey does not want to have Russia as an enemy. Russia is also has very good relations with Erdogan, President Erdogan. So it means that if you look at Black Sea, why Russia is so active, why they want this territory and they want to manipulate, and they are quite aggressive, because Russian Sea is an area of the conflict, not just between Ukraine and Russia. It's all between NATO and Russia. Yeah, it's like there is a clash of interest of Russia in NATO, and the Crimea is also this peninsula. It's just what is called the Platzdarm, or area for the Russian interest in southeastern flank of NATO. It's not just they want all Russians together. It's something that NATO is expanding, enlarging, and they want to stop it, I think. This is my personal point of view. Let's look at military policy of Russia. From 2008, Putin started actively to build its military presence in Black Sea region. Crimea and Donbass and Lugansk is just like the consequences, let me say so. Because if we look now in Crimea today, the 28,000 Russian military soldiers are still present there. So for the last 5 years, the Russian budget has increased a lot. And this is military budget. It's not just budget for the development of country. And I read today Professor Trenins, the Russian expert, about what is going on in Russia and the situation about Ukraine. He says that unfortunately, there were only 2 tasks for Russia initially. So the first task was to manage the sovereignty, to unite the country. But Putin is, I think, and Dr. Treni actually confirms the statement, that saying that he's losing the economic and political development of their society. So I think Ukraine is doing the same thing. I hope President Zelensky may find some joint maybe points, and will make, as Putin, will make some concessions towards each other in order to have negotiations. Because as I know, Zelensky has refused to even what is called the participation of the mediators in the negotiation with Russia. This is very problematic because they don't want to stay and sit and negotiate something between them. So I think Ukraine will not go far. Ukraine has very similar roots in comparison to Kazakhs, for instance, with Russia. They are brotherly states and with Slavic roots, and this is historically already proven. There are Western Ukrainians want to be part of the European Union, and European Union supports Ukrainian position on Azov and the Black Sea policy. But despite of this fact, Ukraine should consider not to lose the Russian, not influence, but the Russian maybe partnership, because I'm sure Ukraine doesn't want to be isolated. And unfortunately, the situation that we see today is just bringing to that position. The situation might change very difficult and become very complicated. So they have to reconsider. And as you know, officially, for instance, Kazakhstani position, President Tokayev and our Yilbaz Nursultan Nazarbayev, they claimed for the balanced position. That's why Kazakhstan has never officially, said about their support of Russia or Ukraine, because both countries are our partners. We have very good and high turnover with these countries. And I think we should, they should actually find some common platform to talk and negotiate. Thank you. I hope I was clear. I didn't prepare that like my colleagues, so sorry for that. I think Dr. Mukam can add, right? Can you add a little bit?
Thank you, Professor Ilibayeva. Actually, as much as good analysis as yours, but I'll try to.
Dear Dr. Mukam,
thank you very much.
We cannot hear your voice very well. in my opinion, there is
Oh,
some
really?
problem.
What about now? What about now? Do you hear me right now? Do you hear me right now? What about now? No?
Таким Мукаш, наверное, лучше чуть-чуть отойти от экрана. Микрофон очень шумит.
Okay, what about now? Do you hear me very well?
In my opinion, plug problem in the in microphone, as far as I understood that.
Sorry, let me, sorry. Do you hear me very well right now?
Murat, firstly, we wait that Mr. Mukan solving the problem. Maybe give the floor to other guests, okay?
Yes, Mr. Mukan, did you solve the problem about microphone? Or we could
Because the other guest, Mr. Nitao, if possible.
okay,
Okay.
we can continue. We can continue with Dr. Krasnyanito, especially. I'm just wondering the European Union aspect of the Russia and Ukraine relations, especially in terms of the Nord Stream and Turkish Stream. So the Normandia 4 aspect. So we are just wondering about the results on the Russia and Ukraine relations in terms of the European Union. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really did enjoy hearing the other presentations, and we heard quite a lot of details about Ukraine's approach and what's actually happening in the Black Sea region. So in my research, I write quite a lot about what's known as the conflict cooperation dichotomy in relations between the European Union and Russia. So that basically refers to the fact that we have simultaneous patterns of cooperation and conflict happening in relations between Russia and the European Union. And these patterns have coexisted throughout the last 30 years. And even though now with the Ukraine crisis, we've seen more conflict and more kind of aggressive rhetoric on both sides towards each other, there's still evidence that cooperation is still happening, as you mentioned, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, but there's also other evidence when it comes to investments coming from different member states to Russia, as well as connections between politicians from new member states and businessmen and politicians in Russia. So the picture is quite mixed. And the question I would ask you, I would ask myself actually, is where does Ukraine fit into all of this, and where does the Black Sea region fit into all of this? Actually, from the perspective of the European Union, at least from the point of view of security, the Black Sea has not really been a priority for the European Union. If you go back to the accession of Romania and Bulgaria, there was a promise about 2007, and then in the build up to this accession, that actually with the inclusion of these two states that basically are states that have access to the Black Sea, the European Union will play a more important role. But with Poland and Sweden taking the initiative in the Eastern Partnership in 2009, the European Union actually focused more on these kind of initiatives rather than focusing on having a more important presence in the Black Sea region. And the whole membership idea of Bulgaria and Romania materializing in some way in the European Union, playing a security role in the Black Sea region, has not really been achieved. And from that perspective, one may argue that EU-Russia relations have actually benefited from the fact that the European Union has not aimed to have a more important security role in the Black Sea region, as obviously this would not have been something that the Kremlin would have been very happy with. So from the perspective of the European Union, I would say Ukraine is definitely a difficult, I would say a hot potato, if we take the more Anglo-Saxon concept. And it's a difficult topic to deal with, especially in relations with Russia. On the one hand, you have many perspectives coming from the member states, so the member states have their own approaches towards Russia. Some of them are much more interested than others in seeing Ukraine being integrated more or less in more or less depth in the European Union, while primarily states in the western part of the European Union have particularly no interest in having closer economic or security relations with Ukraine. So if we look at the example of the Netherlands or Spain or Portugal, where public opinion constantly shows that furthering European integration towards countries in the post-Soviet space is not something that the general public in these countries would generally agree with. So on the one hand, you had this level of complexity where the member states rarely agree on what to do when it comes to Russia, but also when it comes to furthering European integration. But on the other hand, you have some level of agreement when it comes to having this kind of very strong approach towards Russia's aggressive actions in Ukraine, primarily translated in the sanctions regime that we've been seeing implemented since 2014, and particularly in relation to the annexation of Crimea. So this paints, as I said earlier, a very complex picture where you have both cooperation and conflict happening at the same time. But let me just focus a bit on what this actually means for the relation between Ukraine and Russia, because this is a very important point. So if we go back a bit to the Ukraine crisis and how both Russia and Ukraine are using it, we see a sort of convergence. Both Russia and Ukraine have an interest in framing and presenting the Ukraine crisis not as a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but as a conflict between Russia and the West. From the Ukrainian perspective, what Russia is doing in eastern Ukraine or in Crimea is a clear violation of the values of the international liberal community and should be seen as a threat to the liberal world order. While from the Russian perspective, the Ukraine crisis is a symptom of the fact that the liberal world order is not equal, that Russia has been excluded from this liberal world order. And from the perspective of the Kremlin, the narrative that's coming out from the Kremlin, Russia only acted in a way as to protect its vital security interests and to gain that equal seat at the table. But I'm not sure that the European Union is very happy with framing what's happening in Ukraine as a conflict between Russia and the West primarily. So a lot of voices coming from the member states are arguing that this should be seen as a conflict either that's insulated to the Ukrainian state, which may or may not coincide with some of the narratives we see on Russian state media regarding especially regarding Eastern Ukraine and the fight between rebel forces and Ukrainian state forces. But also some member states are arguing that actually this is a conflict that's primarily limited to Russia and Ukraine, and the European Union should only interfere in order to solve this conflict and bring the two sides to the table of discussion. So, and the normative format from that perspective is a result of this kind of thinking. So as I mentioned earlier, you have these two different versions of framing the conflict. And the fact that we've encountered a stalemate for the last 5 or 6 years, I would say is the result that these two conflicting framing and ways of presenting the conflict have not been accommodated in any way. So there's been no attempt on both the side of the European Union, as well as Russia and Ukraine, to actually come together and try to develop a common understanding of what are the key issues at hand and what would be the main pathways of actually developing a conflict resolution mechanisms. And let me finish on another point. I think from the perspective of NATO, the Ukraine crisis and all the security challenges that we've seen, particularly in the Black Sea region, have been a godsend, I would say. So they've been very favorable to NATO. So before 2013, NATO was highly criticized, especially due to its intervention in Libya, but also of its long-term what some people would frame as a failure in Afghanistan. But the renewed Russian threat, especially in Ukraine, but also in Eastern Europe or the Eastern Front, however you may want to call it, has given a new lease of life for NATO. So from the perspective of NATO, of this organization, basically preserving the idea that there is instability in the Black Sea region, that Russia is a continuous threat, is a way for itself to basically forge a new sort of rationale for itself. So it's for presenting itself as the key solution. So we've seen NATO being much more assertive in its tone in relation towards Russia and involving itself, even though at the margins of what it can do in terms of cooperation with Ukraine, but at least in discourse, trying to show that it is willing to have a more meaningful partnership with Ukraine. And some of the speakers before provided some more practical details about this issue. So I think I'll end on this, but yeah, thank you for inviting me, guys.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nito. So before I'm giving the floor to Mr. Mukan, so I want to say that audiences also could write questions via the YouTube chat zone. So after the ending the conversations and talkings about Russia-Ukraine relations, so we can take these questions. Yes, Mr. Mukan. So we are just curious about the Russian cyber attacks, but now we are also relieved that we can see you. So what do you think about the Eurasian and European Union choosing of the Ukraine? How do they also reflect the Ukraine and the Russian foreign policy?
Thank you very much, colleagues, for inviting me and giving the floor. Do you hear me very well right now?
Still Russian cyber attack.
Let me switch my camera. Maybe. Okay. What about now?
It is not possible.
So without camera, still there are still Russian attacks. No.
Maybe Maximilian, maybe you change computer to your mobile phone. Maybe you use your mobile phone.
Yeah, I will do that. Again, colleagues, my apologies. I will rejoin from my mobile phone.
Okay.
Yes, I want to give floor to Mr. Ustayev about it. So, what do you think about Ukraine's choice of the Eurasian side and European Union side? So, in terms of the Russia-Ukraine relations.
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's clear.
Thank you. Just a few words what our participants have said. From the very beginning, I mean 1991, Russia had plans to undermine Ukraine's sovereignty and capture Crimea. We all remember previous Russian interventions, namely actions which were taken by so-called presidents of Crimea, Meshkov, who had full support from Russian politicians and Russian special services. We remember Tuzla issue when Russia tried to capture part of Ukraine. We remember Russia's activities during Ukraine's Orange Revolution, not to mention the situation during Yanukovych's presidency, which had led to the occupation of Crimea by Russia and war in Ukraine. And the attempt annexation of Crimea by Russia is a complete breakdown, a law and order, and it is aimed at implementation the Kremlin's policy in the Black Sea, as well in a broader context, from the Baltic, and as our distinguished participants have said, to the Mediterranean. Thus, it challenges not only Ukraine security, but the transatlantic unity as well, destroying post-Cold War security order. And what is going on between Ukraine and Russia right now is geopolitical and cultural clashes. The battleground for fighting authoritarianism. We want peace. Ukrainians want peace. And if you want peace, prepare for peace. And this paraphrased Roman maxim should guide our efforts aimed at increasing the level of security. Ukraine's key national interests in the region are restoring territorial integrity, the occupation of Crimea, freedom of navigation in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. And first and foremost, to implement this strategy, Ukraine needs to build supportive stakeholder coalitions. And actually, we have one. We have complete support from the NATO, we have complete support from the US, from the EU in issue of Crimea and issue Russian aggression against Ukraine. And what Ukraine needs is Western approach to defend, talking about the Black Sea region and navigation, to defend port of Odessa and port of Mariupol, to attract European and Western investments, to promote a belt of security and prosperity in the whole region. And actually, Ukraine has started to develop a modern technological so-called mosquito fleet. And actually, in this case, we have a full support from the US and UK. And talking about, well, if I may, just a few words about how Russians, how the Kremlin views the Ukraine, and how the Kremlin view the Black Sea and world, actually. And put it simply, Russia's strategic documents shape the world as dangerous for Russia, which aims to limit Russia's power. And what Russian leaders, and actually the whole, I believe, because the Russian propaganda works successfully, and what actually Russians think about Russia itself, it's to establish Russia's leading role on the world stage. And what Russians think about Ukraine, well, is to regain political and military control over Ukraine, and control over all former Soviet countries, and keep them in Russia's sphere of interests. And that's why we witnessed Russia's military build-up in Crimea, modernization of Black Sea Fleet and Caspian flotilla, and increased ground force in whole southern military, Russian southern military district, I mean. And I believe that Ukraine and the EU and NATO needs to have strategy for Black Sea region. Well, we have a clear vision how to synchronize our activities in the region, and our cooperation includes regular political consultations, diverse support for reforming Ukrainian security, defense sectors, including including education and training. And what we need from the EU and from NATO is to increase NATO military presence in the Black Sea, and increase the number of naval exercises, I believe, are the solution. Increasing the naval exercise, I believe, is a solution. And actually, NATO presence will help to Ukraine to protect Western and European investments in the region. And talking about some security issues, there is a project, the 5i, which is an intelligence alliance comprising Australia, Canada, the UK, US, and New Zealand. So we should think about the creating mechanism for exchange of intelligence to prevent further Russian interventions in the Black Sea region. And it could be alliance comprising Ukraine, Georgia, and NATO members. And talking about just a few words about so-called concept Ruski Mir, as Anatoly Chubais, who is a special representative of Russia's president, 2 or 3 weeks ago said that the project Ruski Mir is dead. And what I'm going to say that after deportation of the Crimean Tatar people from Crimea by Stalin's regime, 100,000 Russians settled in Crimea. They came from different Russian places, and most of them were family members of Soviet army servants. So that's why they still wish to be a part, so-called Ruski Mir. But we should remember that Crimea is a homeland for Crimean Tatar people, as indigenous people of Ukraine, and part of Ukrainian society, Ukrainian political nation, because we have just one political nation. We all Ukrainians, well, we have different ethnic roots. And I believe that Crimean Tatar people plays a crucial role in the resistance to Russian aggression. And we have a huge amount of UN resolutions, of Crimean Tatars are mentioned in the EU documents, so that Crimean Tatars is crucial in the resistance to Russian aggression. And actually, Crimean Tatars people confirmed Ukraine's firm stance on Crimea globally. And just a few words about the Crimean platform, which is my colleagues have mentioned it, just a few words, but we will have a Crimean platform summit on August 2021, which is an important part, I believe, the strategy for deoccupation and reintegration, which was approved in last March by National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. And this platform, I believe, is an important part of this strategy in broader context, because it must be an element of the security approach from the Baltic state to the Middle East. And actually, I believe it will happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ustayev. Now, thank God, dear Dr. Sakemukan also solved the problems. So we are also escaping the Russian cyber attacks. Now we are in the webinar also. Yes, Mr. Mukan. So do you want to share your opinions about this?
Of course, colleagues. Hope my voice is now very well. Probably everything is okay with connection. My apologies again, colleagues and Murat.
It's very
well,
okay,
excellent. Thank you so much. Actually, I'm not expert in this area, but I'll try to match as much as short, because my colleague, Professor Ilibayev, actually just pointed out several issues that actually I wanted to share. But anyway, we have also different divisions. I would like to add to Professor Ilibayev's point of view that asked the questions. Actually, first point is that of course we see the situations. We see how the scenario is giving its results and how scenario is being changed and so forth. What I would like to point out is that the first point is that whatever sanctions you do against Russia, whatever international involvement support against Russia you do, I'm referring to Ukrainians. We are, as a Kazakhstanians, see that, and this actually there's no any kind of the how can I say? There's no any kind of the results for that, because those sanctions are coming immediately. Immediately after a couple of minutes, come to Kazakhstan. We live in one Eurasian Economic Union. We live in one security treaty organization, a collective security treaty organization. We live together in the CIS. We live together in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So I mean, after the 2014, we see. I mean, what are the sanctions? What are the results, outcome of these sanctions actually? And I'm speaking this not as academic staff, but I'm speaking this as a Kazakhstani citizens. So that kind of that kind of the dollarization policy, that exchange rate to US dollar to euro and other kind of the currencies, I mean, doesn't affect too much for our economy. I mean, what do I want to say by this point? I want to say that if the Russia is the elephant in the room, then making Russia as a small elephant in the room, or bringing up the Russia as a good guy in the geopolitical game. I mean, still this is impossible, not because the Russia is a strategic ally of Kazakhstan. I'm saying this. It is because the reality of the geopolitical reality that we see how Russia is doing with its neighborhood and so forth. So when I read the articles, when I see like anti-Russian mass media or pro-Russian mass media, because still we have the large Russian-speaking population in Kazakhstan, and of course we see many kind of contradictions in terms of the does NATO need the problematic Ukraine to help? Does need EU the problematic Ukraine to help against Russia? I mean, when I say this, my personal opinion is that what is the strategy of Ukraine foreign policy to implement in its rational way? Right, there are some issues happens, and what is happening in Donbass, the event of 2014, and all international efforts, the sanctions against Russia. I mean 6 years or 7 years actually it is being taken place and so forth. Please, I mean, believe me, from a practical point of view, I mean, those sanctions doesn't work. I mean, because the country is full of the energy resources. I mean, there are lots of the way to restore Russian economy and so forth. So we're as a Kazakhstanians that we produce. I mean, we consume the Russian products with the all kind of the Russian business influence and so forth. So there are issues, but it does not mean that Kazakhstanians do not sorry for Ukraine. I mean, in Kazakhstan, one of the largest the ethnical populations in Kazakhstan, Ukrainians actually, who are living but they identify themselves as a Russian-speaking populations. So here is that those kind of reforms that taking place as a case of Kazakhstan, as example. If you ask me as a Kazakhstanians, just the Kazakhstan did these reforms immediately after they got getting independence. I'm giving the official status of Russian language, giving the day off for the 7th of January of the Russian Orthodox Christians holiday and so forth. So of course here is that by the Ukrainian colleagues was told before about the nation state building. Right, nations building. I mean, this is the obvious things, actual obvious natural desire, wish of the people to have the national identity and so forth. Right. So here are the difficult situations of geopolitical situations of the Ukraine, especially here is that the Black Sea area, Azov Sea area, the tensions that are that frequently Russian military troops are bringing the near borders of the Russia of Ukraine. So here we see many kind of the I would say many kind of the unclear situations, expecting Ukrainians help from the NATO or EU. From my point of view, I'm quite skeptical that EU and NATO will help and saying, oh, welcome to us and so forth. Again, EU and NATO does not need that kind of the problematic, currently problematic Ukraine. I'm sorry. I mean, those kind of the potential, I mean, of course, the Ukraine has excellent potential, economic, political potential in the eastern part of Europe, and here is it. I mean, it will be big competitors for the Germany, for France. So the same situation with Turkey, as the negotiations agreement with the negotiations still happens since the 1960s with the accession to European Union and so forth. Still, Turkey is not EU members, not because of the cultural differences, but because of the competitions, big competitor in European market for its textile, for its tourism market, and other kind of the economic sector. So from my point of view, especially from Kazakhstanian point of view, that we observe the situations and comes to our mind, who is the next of the victim of Russia? Kazakhstan? Yeah, why not? Yes, might be. Kazakhstan could be, right? I mean, here we see that immediately after the getting independence, the President Nazarbayev moved the capital city to the north, bringing Kazakh to the mixing with the Russians to the north, and immediately actually started to have negotiations with Yeltsin and then continued with the Putin of the all legal status of the demarcations of the borders. That's one of the longest borders in the world. And of course, now after the 30 years of getting independence, it has started saying that, oh, now I mean the Kazakh officials started to make reforms for the Latinization of the Kazakh alphabets. Yeah, I mean, still we have in comparison with the Uzbekistan, the Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, yes, and I mean, we're one of those kind of countries that did not make reforms on this. I mean, we concentrated to more have a balanced, I mean, giving the status of the official language for for Russians and for Russian-speaking population, because you need to understand very, very important issues. I mean, of course, the narrative of the nation-state building. This is the the topic of discussions. I mean, how does a nation-state building be implemented, right? In these cases, in Kazakhstan, with the multi-ethnical, multi-confessional society, and of course here just that most important is that giving the by constitutional law giving the status of Russian language in 1995. So and here we see the how does the Russia-Ukraine relations affect to Kazakhstan, especially Eurasian Economic Union and other Central Asian Republic. So we see here, of course, those kind of products that you use, the Ukrainians, the products, of course, they're coming for us with the very high price, not cheap, and so forth. There are very trade disbalance between the Ukraine and Kazakhstan and so forth. So, and that is very important issues. Again, that the my point of view is that with the sanctions, with the international support, with the all multilateral diplomacy mechanism, making Russia a good guy, it's impossible, colleagues. I mean, this is the Russia. I mean, with the wrong historical, the imperialistic, the background. So this is the reality that we see. So in this point of view, just again, when I see what is happening, especially when there are with different kind of from the UN summit, from the OSCE summit, when Zelensky is being invited to NATO summit as a guest, as observer, whatever, and with the EU, especially we use the Eastern Partnership neighborhood policy. They have some kind of programs with that, where Ukraine also the part of this policy. So there are lots of issues which is impossible to make Russia. So what is the solution of the problem, right? Of course, here we see our topic is very good today. It's like a Black Sea and Azov region, right? I mean, here I think that there are actually the first steps also, like maybe Turkish involvement, Turkish foreign policy involvement to this process, with the agenda saying that the Black Sea as a safe, economic cooperation and so forth. Recognizing that Crimean Tatars are the Turkic ethnicities, also they have some kind of the caring for these nations and so forth. So there are lots of issues. For example, the Russian-Turkish military conflict in 2015. Of course, we'll solve it and so forth. Of course, anyway, after that, the Erdogan and Putin negotiations started with actually having the negotiations and also sign such kind of the energy project agreements and so forth. So there are many issues. What I would like to stress, point out that kind of the mechanisms of those suburban the Black Sea countries, and here I see the Turkey as the main actor. To have a deal with the Russians. And then first of all to make the Black Sea as a peacemaking the area, to have economic cooperations, and then the gradually starting the other kind of the geopolitical games or other kind of the political decisions that will be on the agenda and so forth. So that is my opinion in terms of that. Here we see that in reality, Kyiv officials doesn't control the Donbass, Lugansk, and Donetsk area. I mean, we know what is the Crimean Peninsula. Of course, where Kazakhstanians are really carrying psychologically, emotionally, physically, that there are different kind of approach to understand what is happening in this area. So the point is that actually. And the last point that I would like to point out, despite of the fact that in 2014 in the UN, the General Assembly, the Kazakhstan just became the neutral. I mean, did not support the Russia nor the Ukraine on the Crimea status, but Probably 3 months ago, Kazakhstan journalists revealed some facts that the Kazakhstan Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually has the particular sentences in its documents that saying that Kazakhstan citizens are not needs to. If the Kazakhstan citizens wish to visit the Crimea Peninsula, they need to visit via Kiev, not via Moscow and so forth. So that's why. And then the Kazakh mass media actually announced that the Kazakhstan anyway in practice support Ukrainian territorial integrity. Thank you very much, and I apologize for my technical mistakes. Sorry. Thank you.
No, Mr. Mukan. So the finish is good, in my opinion. Thank you for your opinions about this. So I'm just wondering about the Russia-Ukraine relations, how to reflect to Turkey-Russia relations, because as far as we know that, as far as we remember that President Zelensky and President Erdogan also held a meeting in Turkey, and Turkey gave support to Ukraine for the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and also mentioning about the Crimean Tatars, and then returned to Turkey. Russia also, especially with Mr. Lavrov, urged Turkey not to escalate the military ambitions of the Ukraine, also urged to Turkey. So I just wondering that how did Turkey-Ukraine relations reflect to Turkey-Russia relations? So I want to give, unfortunately, only 2 minutes to all participants to share opinions about this. So I want to start with Mr. Maxim Budovchenko.
Okay, Dr. Jane, thank you so much. Less than 2 minutes, just a couple of words. We respect the sovereignty, the Turkish Republic, and the foreign policy of Turkish Republic is, I'm sorry, the relation between Ukraine and Turkish Republic have a very positive dynamics, and we are strategic partners from 2011. So for this moment, we have very intensive dialogue in all spheres of cooperation, including the economic sphere. We are talking about the foreign trade agreement. Hopefully it would be finished this year. We have very intensive dialogue in political sphere, and especially in military and technical cooperation. And at the same time, we cannot give any advices, any concerns to our Turkish partners about their relation with Russia. Turkey has her own foreign policy and very pragmatic foreign policy, and we completely understand the Turkish approaches. So that's my comment.
Okay,
thank you so
very much. Okay, we also understood your comments, and thank you for your contribution, Mr. Budovchenko. By the way, I want to opinions of dear Associated Professor Dr. Aygerin Yeliboeva about this issue. So what do you think about this situation? Turkey-Ukraine relations on Russia.
Yes, thank you. Well, I consider Turkey as any other state, first of all, as a partner state. So I'm sure that all of us as partner state of Ukraine and Russia will face problems and negative side effects in the case of big conflicts between Russia and Ukraine. So I just considered while listening to all speakers and decided just to summarize by saying just a couple words that the problem is not just between two countries, but it's the desire of Ukraine. Ukraine society is very polarized. Their attempts to be a democratic state, even European state, is very high, and I really support their intention. And this affects the Ukrainian decision-making in general. So it's not the matter of language, it's also the matter of ideology and the culture. And of course, it affects all relations, even with Turkey. The meeting of President Erdogan and President Zelensky showed that Turkey is quite sure in its position. But if you analyze the meetings between President Erdogan and Putin, you see the same trends. So it means that we are on the both sides, actually. Kazakhstan also supports both partners because all countries are partners between themselves, yes? And this cultural, what it's called, the propensity to democratization from Ukrainian side is quite high. And I think we should just give the opportunity for Ukraine to decide to become a Western country and join the European Union, or to become Westernized, but still a partner of Russia. There is one thing with Turkey is that Turkey is also just take into account the relations between Turkey and Russia in the case of if they get worse. It means that it will influence all spheres, energy sphere, the trade relations, and so on. And the most important thing that all countries are connected through, not just in terms of bilateral relations, but through all, as Sakian said, through other international structures. So I think Ukraine several options that I just, it came to my mind that Ukraine made several steps to leave pro-Russian structures, international structures like CIS and so on. But from the other side, why Ukraine is still didn't, went out, because it was, Ukraine didn't want to lose these benefits, trade benefits of this free trade regime in terms of CIS. You see, Ukraine understands what will happen in the case if there will be conflict, and it could be isolated. So we cannot actually support one-sided policy from Ukraine or from Russia. We need to support and push them to find some consolidated action, to negotiate and to decide whether we can do it somehow differently. So I support that we should talk about the peace negotiations between countries, and that will affect the regional security and Turkey also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, dear Dr. Bletska, so what do you think about the Turkey-Ukraine relations, on the Turkey-Russia relations? Unfortunately, we cannot hear your voice.
Right now?
Yes, it's clear now.
Good. So probably I will try to summarize this relation as a triangle, let's say, not the bilateral Turkish-Ukrainian, Russian-Turkish. So the heavy militarization of Crimea by Russian Federation after its illegal annexation actually challenges the security of the Black Sea region, and probably the country that suffer most of this is actually Turkey. So because of that, I think that the cooperation between Russia and Turkey in the military sphere after this illegal annexation and heavy militarization is quite limited. The possibilities of this cooperation is quite limited because of security reasons again. So this opens a door to Ukrainian-Turkish relations because they have zero problems and high security trust to each other. That's why the military cooperation, we can right now we see the boost of military cooperation between these two countries. So actually the loss of security between two countries, between Turkey and Russia, makes Turkish-Ukrainian relations even more stronger and more reliable.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Nukan, Mr. Dr. Nukan. So what do you think about this? But we just only 11 minutes, because after that another meeting will be broadcasting.
Thank you so much. I agree with the previous speaker. Exactly. Here, there is the triangle, the dimensions here. It depends on actually the Erdogan's regime, how Erdogan's regime actually will react to all kinds of challenges and requests by Putin. Here is the interpersonal connections is very important, and if those countries are, let me say, authoritarian, let me say bravely this, including Kazakhstan, my country. So, and here we see that how, I mean, whatever intentions Erdogan has, and whatever the to me as a peacemaker in this region, in the Black Sea, especially with the Crimean situations. Whatever requests Russia is doing for the Erdogan, we see here that the personalities are quite using each other for its personal methods, personal needs. So the Russians or Putin's understand that the Erdogan that does not agree with, not always does not agree with the all kind of the NATO agreements as a partnership agreements within the NATO, and the majority of the partners, NATO partners, are the European Union states, and here is the migration problems from Syria, and many kind of that kind of obstacles that Putin and Erdogan can negotiate with that, and it depends the situations, how what kind of requests will come from Ukraine, and how does the Turkey and Russians can have agreement with each other to have fulfill or their requests for each other. So it depends on those kind of the internal factors in Russia, internal factors in Turkey themselves. So here is that the relations will be in such directions. I guess that's my point. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. We have very last minute, so I just want a couple statements from Professor Sosyal and Mr. Ustayev.
Yeah,
yes.
I'll pick very interesting points were made, and I think from the perspective of Russian-Turkish relations, if you look at what most analysts would have to say, there's an agreement that this relationship is mostly a partnership of convenience, this kind of friends with benefits type of engagement. And obviously now there is this kind of mutual backlash against Western values and this perceived imposition of Western values on two civilizations that see themselves as having this kind of historical greatness, such as the Russian and the Turkish one. But I think Turkey actually complicates the situation for Ukraine, because it is, if Ukraine wants to use Turkey in order to highlight its allegiance to the European Union, I think that's quite problematic, because Turkey has its own kind of problems with the European Union. So that might not be the best way which Ukraine might enhance its allegiance to the European Union. But at the same time, I think Turkey's engagement with NATO also complicates the situation. While Ukraine wants to, as we've heard from our speakers, wants to have increased military presence and support from NATO, I'm not sure that Turkey would agree with this position, especially in the context of its relations with Russia, in the context of this partnership of convenience, where Turkey might not be prepared to sacrifice Russia's interests in order to promote Ukraine's own security interests in relations to NATO. But I'll finish on that. Thanks again for the event.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will give floor to Professor Saynur Darman.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Turks are and Russia are two nations that have confronted many times in history, sometimes cooperating but often competing. Recently, the relations between two countries have witnessed very rapid change and surprising developments. Occupation and annexation of Crimea by Russia was the result of already existing political crisis between Russia and Ukraine that has devastating economical and political effects both on Crimea and Ukraine. Turkey has Russia's annexation of Crimea has a great impact on the world public opinion. The European Union and the United States imposed certain sanctions about Russia, and regional problems suddenly became a global problem. Turkey has also criticized Russia's annexation of Crimea because of historical ties of Crimea with Turkey. After the annexation of Crimea, he didn't recognize the annexation of, showed an attitude toward Ukraine's territorial integrity.
Thank you very much. To wrap up, yes, Mr. Neriman Ustayev.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think Ukraine communicates strategic messages to Ankara to build supportive partnership due to the fact that stakeholders are responding rationally and draw the conclusions from the facts and national interests rather than third-party countries' interests. And we should admit that shaping the Black Sea security, Turkey's role is maintaining the balance of power in the Black Sea has increased tremendously. Not mention Syria and Azerbaijan issues and interaction between Turkey and Russia on these tracks, but due to the lack of time, I will not stop here right now. And just a few words about the EU and NATO, why the EU and NATO are interested in Ukraine, because we can say do the wrong thing once and it's easily to do it again. So, and I believe that the EU and NATO do realize it, and they think about the Baltic states, they think about the Poland, as Kazakhstan does, I believe. So I think that we have the brighter future than we have right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for all participants and audiences to share this Friday evening with us. Lastly, I want to give floor to Professor Kutay Karaca for the closing speech. Yes, Professor. Hocam, you can open your microphone. Hocam, please open your microphone.
Not a Russian cyber attack, you know that. It is my fault. Murat, first, thank you very much. Dear participants, dear guests, maybe we have some students that follow us. On behalf of my university, my institute, and also Diplomatic Research Center, I salute all of you again. Yeah, you know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Zoom meetings became a part of our lives. Yes, really. In this process, we have organized meetings with our professors and experts from different fields. Today, I think it was the 6th of this series. We addressed a very important issue for Turkey also and our region. But I have some. I want to mention something after listening all our esteemed participants. I think it would be wrong to comment on the Ukraine crisis only through Russia. As you know, in the post-Cold War period, a reflection of the geopolitical struggle between NATO, European Union, and Russia appears now in Ukraine. While many different approaches many different opinions, especially from the Russian side. We need to know and we need to understand the other side also, you know that. Really, while Western states are carrying out an expansion strategy towards Russian borders, Russia has begun to feel a lot of concern that it is being biased by the West. Therefore, you know that the Kremlin pursued a foreign policy strategy that challenged the West through the examples of Georgia, Ukraine, and Syria. Russia has managed to turn the domestic crisis in Ukraine into international one. Since the beginning of the millennium, you know, Russia's foreign policy has not been defined directly as expansion. It may be necessary to see Russia's strategic in a defense approach also. That's an approach and an opinion from the Russian side. Of course, the implementation of economic sanctions by Western states also makes Russia difficult. The point to keep in mind, I think, is Russia weakens will force this economic sanctions weaken the Russia, and because of that, he maybe he must to leave the occupied territory. It's an opinion, and Moscow's strategy is on the continuity of her chosen administrations in those countries. Moscow has not interfered the economic relations of these administrations. However, he is not allowed them to enter into a group or any alliance that against Russia. With positive and multilateral diplomacy, I think it would be possible to ensure peace in Ukraine. I hope so. The existence of an independent Ukraine is very important in terms of the balance of the Black Sea, I think. And also, I need to mention that Turkey must have to continue to implement the Montreux regime, which has, you know, guaranteed stability and peace in the Black Sea for years. I hope this meeting could bring proposals for resolving the problems in the region through the diplomatic channels, and maybe that may bring some benefits to establishing of lasting peace and tranquility in the region, I think. This is my ideas, yeah. First, really, I would like to thank to also Diplomatic Research Association, which cooperated with in the organization of this webinar. Also, Professor Sainer Bozkurt, he's so close friend for me from Marmara University, has made us happy with her participation. Also, the Consulate General of Ukraine, Mr. Maxim Vidashenko, are our guests today, and I really thank to him. And of course, today we are together with very esteemed foreign academicians, Ms. Blaska, Ms. Yelibayeva, Mr. Sakan, Mr. Mitao, Mr. Ustayev. I really salute them, all my respect again. And finally, I would like to thank Murat Jane, his colleague of me from our department, and all my other colleagues from the university for organizing this webinar. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I want to thank all participants and audiences. I wish you healthy days without COVID-19, and have a nice day. Have a nice Friday evening.
Thank you
Have a
so
nice
much.
Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar. iyi
Teşekkür
akşamlar.
ederim. Hoşça kalın. Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkür ederim.